This is one of two cameras I carried in Vietnam. These were the cameras I used to take the photos that were published in Tropic Lightning News and later in Stars and Stripes. I loved this baby. It was a black body. I got it specifically to try to keep as much of the glint off the camera as possible under fire.
The Vietnam War rages. The Army's 25th Infantry Division, known as Tropic Lightning for their speed and bravery, is one of the first units in Vietnam. This is the story of three of those soldiers whose lives intersect in a moment captured forever on film. Byron Doc Johnson, medic. Alan Stortveit, infantry. Charles Self, combat photographer and editor in The Picture. "50 years after the end of the Vietnam War, Alan Stortveit is surfing the internet when he sees a picture from the June 1st, 1970 edition of the Tropic Lightning News. He recognizes Byron Johnson treating a wounded North Vietnamese soldier after a firefight.
Before we went to Cambodia, he was in our platoon, and that's why I knew him when I saw him in the picture.
He remembers that day in 1970 when he stood next to Charles Self, as Charles photographs the scene for the division's Tropic Lightning newspaper. Byron Doc Johnson, the medic in the picture, grows up in a small mining town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
I graduated in 1963 from A.D. Johnston High School in Bessemer, Michigan. My mother, she gave me the same graduation gift that she gave my older sister, Kay, and that was a suitcase. And she said, with the mines closing, there isn't going to be much of a future here.
After high school, Byron attends Northern Michigan University, where he's a football star and captain of the football team. He still holds the record for the most blocked punts at Northern. Byron moves to California to teach. He leaves teaching in 1968 and is drafted.
I had decided that I needed to do something. I thought it was our finest hour, in the words of Winston Churchill, that this was really important.
Alan Stortveit grows up in rural Long Island, where he hunts and fishes in the woods and parties with friends. He's drafted shortly after graduating from high school.
I got in April of '69. I had options to join other elite units, which would have made me have to stay in the service longer. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get back home and get on with my life. We knew we were going to Vietnam.
Charles Self is a journalist working for United Press International when he's drafted in 1969. Charles' family's religious beliefs forbid killing, and as a conscientious objector, he's going into battle carrying only a camera.
I arrived in Cu Chi, Vietnam, in February of 1970. They promptly made me a reporter for the 25th Infantry Division newspaper, which was called Tropic Lightning News.
Well, after basic training, I was sent to San Antonio to become a medic. That was also the 3rd Field Hospital for the Army. Next thing you know, we're in Vietnam and Tan Son Nhut Air Base right near Saigon.
While Byron Johnson is in Vietnam, his girlfriend Karen teaches school in Indiana and waits for him to return.
When he was in Vietnam, I remember that we would, both of us, look at the moon at night and know that that was the one thing we could share.
Now, where we were, this was a special operating base in Vietnam, but the Cambodian border was only like 15 miles away. Everybody carried grenades, everybody carried C4 explosive. Everybody had to carry ammo for the machine gunner. close to dark, you would get on the Navy boat and they would take you out to a predetermined location on the sides of the river. You would set up an ambush site. You would do that all night long until the following morning. And just before light, the Navy would come and extract us.
We had been getting increasing rumors that we were likely to go into Cambodia during April.
In cooperation with the Armed Forces of South Vietnam, attacks are being launched this week to clean out major enemy sanctuaries on the Cambodian-Vietnam border.
And all of a sudden, the orders came down that we had to destroy the base camp we were in. We were going to Cambodia.
On the morning of Saturday, May 9, 1970, helicopters carry Byron, Alan, and Charles to different landing sites just across the Cambodian border. Although part of Delta Company, each is in a separate platoon as they move into the fight.
We packed everything up and they flew us by helicopter over to a town that veterans will probably remember, Cane Inn. That as a runway for the C-130s and the helicopters to bring in troops from all over.
So we flew in, and the helicopters came down in a place where the vegetation had been cleared, and it was Agent Orange had shrunk up all the vegetation. That's when we got the first attack. But it wasn't NVA, it wasn't Viet Cong. It was ants. We were on top of a giant anthill. So all the troops were doing this. You know, it was hard to hold your weapons when you're slapping all these ants. So we immediately received word to get out of there. So we got it back into the clearing. And then from there, we began the real work of what we had to face as troops.
We didn't have to walk point as a medic, but if you were in a small squad, you'd have to walk on point. Walking on point is the point man, the first man in a column, the one that's most likely to get shot. We're working through there, and all of a sudden, we make contact.
And at that point, we heard an explosion upriver. And then we heard a second explosion. We escaped into the woods and got down into a gully. And I took a picture of the troops sheltering in the gully. That picture was also published in the Tropic Lightning News. And I understand later actually went to the White House to show what was happening in Cambodia.
By early afternoon, Byron's platoon is engaged in a fierce firefight with the enemy. Alan and Charles' platoons hear the explosions and move to assist.
We immediately began moving toward that unit because the gunfire was rather intense. As we approached, we could hear them tossing hand grenades into the other unit.
There was a big anthill like this. I went and I dove behind that anthill. They shot up the anthill and it just blew up. And so I low crawled on my belly along the dike that the anthill was near, and I threw some grenades and put right on the dike, and all I could see was that guy with the gun. There was only, as far as I recall, there was only one gun and one spotter. When he swung around with that weapon, and you know this could be your last, your mind slows down and you see everything that's happening, and it's like slow motion.
I remember it because it was so fresh. It was one of the first things that happened when we went in.
I reloaded and got another grenade out. And by this time, the squad that I was in, they were now firing. And we started talking to them to surrender, but we used the Vietnamese term, chu hoi. Well, then being the medic, I had to do what was in my mind crazy. I mean, here I am 1 minute shooting and trying to kill them before they kill me, and now I got to patch them up.
As Alan stands beside him, Charles pulls out his camera to capture the aftermath of the battle.
So in this picture, I was standing where the photo was taken from. Looking at these Vietnamese, they were pretty banged up. Some of them were shot, some of them had grenade fragments in them.
The firefight had just ended, and this is a photo I took as I rushed over from the other platoon. These troops had been captured. They had been set down there. They were going to be interrogated. You see Byron crouched there. He had a moment before been fighting these guys, and now he's treating them, making sure that they survive. And so he's trying to kill them 1 minute, and he's trying to save them the next.
After Cambodia, Charles becomes a reporter for Stars and Stripes and travels to hotspots all over Vietnam. Byron heads to Hawaii for R&R, where he proposes to Karen. He goes back to Vietnam to finish his service. Meanwhile, Alan returns to the fight in the jungles of Vietnam.
We walked together side by side going down that trail. Now this trail was only as wide as your arms could reach out. There was a rustle in the brush. 2 seconds it went, and with that I swung my rifle to that area, and an automatic burst went up, and I went down. That was it. And I just laid there, felt like somebody stuck a hot poker up my spine. All I could think of was that somebody was going to come out of that brush and finish me off.
Back in the States, Byron heads first to Karen's apartment in Elkhart, Indiana. They drive north in Karen's Volkswagen to see Byron's parents in Bessemer, Michigan.
All I remember about that trip is we got to a little town in Wisconsin called Merrill. We stopped in this cafe. I was wearing my army jacket that they had given me, because that's all the clothes I had. And somehow the word got out that I was fresh back from Vietnam and going home to Bessemer. And all of a sudden, guys just started clapping and just, just making me feel great. And that was like the first time that anybody really celebrated.
When Charles gets out of the service, he decides to go to graduate school in journalism. But first, he visits family in California.
And went to see a cousin who lived in Los Angeles. One of the most unbelievable experiences, she took me to Disneyland. And if you don't know that's an experience, coming out of Vietnam and going straight to Disneyland, that was really unbelievable to me.
When I came back from Vietnam, I flew into Dover, Delaware. I was still in incredibly intense pain. I was on a striker frame. It's basically a rotisserie that they put you on, and then they rotate you to prevent you from getting bed sores and making your body acclimate to the situation.
Byron, Alan, and Charles are recognized for their heroic service in Vietnam and Cambodia, and each receives 2 Bronze Stars with oak leaf clusters, as well as other medals and commendations. Byron and Alan receive their Bronze Stars with a V designation for valor in combat. Still in a wheelchair, Alan is determined to go on with his life. He trains as a gunsmith and returns home to rural Long Island, where he meets Cindy, the love of his life. Alan never leaves military service behind after his medical discharge. His wife, Cindy, is an Army major and nurse practitioner, and his son serves in the Army.
I remember thinking and admiring him. I think one of the reasons that I fell in love with him was there wasn't a bitter bone in his body. He wasn't angry. He was still very much a patriot. And he was just so brave about the whole thing. It was just, the wheelchair was an inconvenience. Wasn't anything. It wasn't anything other than an inconvenience.
Back home, an invisible enemy reveals its presence.
Our first son had multiple birth defects, and that was the sign of the ravages of Agent Orange. He lived for like 4 months. He was born in September and died in the 2nd of January in 1975.
One of my daughters was born with a congenital heart defect, and I continue to feel that that was connected to Agent Orange.
War is hell, and I think about, especially when I went to the War Memorial in Washington, D.C. and saw the names of guys I served with up on the wall. I come back to that realization that I replaced the guy that was killed. The guy that replaced me was killed. Why am I spared? And there isn't any answer to that.
He was a Vietnamese friendly soldier, and he wrote this letter to me. It says, "To Mr. Allen, with my best respect, that you were fighting side by side with me, the ARVN's forces in Vietnam. I represent all my friends to salute you and all the American troops in South Vietnam." Charles Dixon's letter, who was my lieutenant, it says, "I found these sentiments to be much more forthcoming lately from the Vietnamese. I know, just like us, it has taken them a long time to stop the blame game and gain greater understanding." Ooh, I really don't want to do this. It's a little rough.
Well, as they say, there's always a fog of war, so my memories aren't all that great anymore. But let me say that I've worked in journalism for 65 years. I'm now an old man, and Vietnam and particularly Cambodia were the most intense experiences of my career. And I saw a lot in Vietnam that made me proud to be an American. Those incredible moments of courage and self-sacrifice and compassion and help for other people, and terror and selfishness and fear. All of the human emotions were really stretched when I was there.
In the midst of the Vietnam War, Byron Johnson, Alan Stortveit, and Charles Self shared a moment in time captured in the picture more than 50 years ago. They never intended to become soldiers, but when drafted, each served bravely along with many others during the war. Charles says it well.
My takeaway from my entire stay in Vietnam is these guys were there because their nation asked them to be there. They were there to do their duty, and they went about doing what was asked of them, and it was really incredible to see.
I go back to go hunting, but I also go back for the 4th of July, where Bessemer has the last drum and bugle corps in the American Legion.